Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this presentation. At the Latino Policy Forum, we believe that every child and family deserves to feel welcome, safe, and valued, regardless of their actual or perceived immigration status. Unfortunately, anti-immigrant policies, rhetoric, and uncertainty are increasingly impacting the overall well-being of families across Illinois. The purpose of this workshop is to empower you with tools and resources to support yourself, your loved ones, and the community. Next slide. For those of you who are not super familiar with the Latino Policy Forum, we are a statewide nonprofit policy and advocacy organization that seeks to build a foundation for equity, justice, and economic prosperity for the Latino community. And we seek to do that by improving education outcomes, advocating for affordable housing, promoting just immigration policies, and strengthening community leadership. Next slide. Just to quickly introduce myself, my name is Nina Cedeno. I'm the Senior Immigration Policy Analyst with the Forum.
And hi, everyone. My name is Brian Herrera, and I'm the Community Engagement Manager here at the Latino Policy Forum.
Thanks, Brian. Next slide. In today's presentation, we will have a brief overview of the impacted communities of these recent immigration policy changes. We will do a review of local, state, and federal protections, an introduction to family safety planning, an introduction to well-being, and some self-care strategies. And we'll end with key messages, takeaways, and resources. Next slide.
Thank you, Nina. My hope during our time together is that we can create a mindful space for collaboration where we do not judge but can learn from one another. Today's conversation will touch on sensitive topics regarding the changing political climate and the fear, uncertainty, and stress that it can have on the immigrant community. To provide information, resources, and strategies to caregivers, families, managing uncertainty and stress while caring for your family. This workshop is designed to support family well-being in multifaceted ways. Please remember to engage in respectful communication and refrain from expressing political views and focus on the topic of today's discussion. And as a reminder, this workshop is not a know your rights training. It is a workshop that details local, state, and federal policy and not be considered as legal advice. Please consult with an immigration and family rights attorney for specifics regarding your family's circumstances. Similarly, please consult with a mental health professional for more strategies around mental health. This presentation is complemented with a safe and healthy living resource toolkit at the end. And so we like to start off usually with a warm-up activity, an icebreaker. And this is kind of just to get our perspective changing during difficult moments, during difficult times. So we have a quote here that says, ships don't sink because of the water around them. Ships sink because of water that gets in them. So don't let what's happening around you get inside you and weigh you down. So my question to you all today is, how can we get rid of water? That's how we stop worrying about things that could be like the water, right? That it's getting within our boats. What are some strategies? What are some things that we do that help our well-being? And so take some time to think about those things. I know for me personally, I like to go for walks or even isolate and stay in the car and just take some time to myself and think and what I do have control. So those are just some strategies that I do. But for the purpose of today's presentation, we're going to move on to the next slide.
Thank you, Brian. And some of the things that I like to do, for example, or I like to do some art activities or also go outside when it's nice out. So thank you for reminding us of that. Next, we wanted to put a face to the impacted communities and really reiterate to the families, parents, caregivers watching at home that you are not alone. So next slide. Thank you. In the US, there are many families, millions of families, in fact, that are raising children with at least one parent who is undocumented. But a majority of these kids are US citizens. So we typically call, in the immigration space, we typically call these mixed status families. So a mixed status family is a household in which some family members are U.S. citizens or permanent residents, while others may be undocumented or have different immigration statuses. For example, some children may even have parents who are part of programs like DACA, which is a program that offers temporary protection from deportation while also allowing them to live and work in the United States for a period of time. Next slide. So it's important to acknowledge the impact that these policies could be having on our young children, right? We know that when children are healthy, they are more likely to succeed in school and in life. So what happens when this is not happening, right? When policies, anti-immigrant rhetoric are weighing down on our children. So, we know that, children may be experiencing fear and anxiety during these times. There's research that says that children as young as 3 fear that their parents may be taken away. We've seen stories like this in the news a lot as well. And so when this happens, this could lead to reduced access to social services or less participation in programs like nutrition or healthcare, early education programs. For example, we know with the policy that allowed, right, ICE to enter churches and schools had a harmful impact on families. Suddenly, children weren't showing up to schools, or individuals weren't showing up to work, right? Things like that, or seeking medical care. And so this adds to the stress on families and at teachers, right, that are suddenly noticing that children are not showing up to the classroom. This can put some stress on families and teachers as well. And so, unfortunately, these circumstances could lead to long-term negative effects. So there's a compounding effect. So we know that children's brains are like sponges, right? And so when there are stressors in the environment and they're not being addressed or they're compounding, this can have long-term negative effects on brain development, memory, learning, and emotional regulation. And we'll get to why that's very important later on in this presentation. Next slide. So next, we're going to talk about some of the protections that exist at the federal level and here at the state and local level. So knowledge about this is powerful, right? And so it's important to know that Illinois is one of the most protective state in the nation for immigrants. And so we're going to get into a little bit about what that means. Next slide. So this is by no means an exhaustive list of the bills or policies that exist here in Illinois, but we're just going to go over a few. So we're going to start with the Illinois Trust Act. You may have heard about the Trust Act in the news a lot because it's, come under a lot of, many attacks in the media. So generally, the Trust Act limits state and local law enforcement, police, from participating in federal immigration enforcement. So what does that mean exactly? So this limits local law enforcement cannot stop, arrest, or detain someone just because of a request by ICE or without a warrant signed by a judge. So this is very important, and I'm sure you've heard this in the news with Know Your Rights resources. It also, law enforcement, again, cannot stop, search, or arrest someone based on their immigration or citizenship status. We can go to the next one. The next one is the Illinois Voices Act. So this provides immigrants who have experienced domestic violence, sexual assault, trafficking, and other crimes, and wish to cooperate with law enforcement, the resources they need to apply for a U or T visa, which are, again, visas that provide them with protection and provide them with a pathway to remain in the country. You go to the next one. The Illinois Way Forward Act strengthens the Trust Act and the Voices Act. It clarifies that state and local law enforcement should not collaborate with ICE on civil immigration enforcement. Again, unless there's a warrant signed by a judge, police should not be collaborating with ICE. And this also clarifies that law enforcement cannot detain someone, again, on the basis of an immigration a request by ICE. It also states that Illinois cannot sign contracts with the federal government to detain immigrants. So again, Illinois does not have detention centers anymore. And then finally, it also authorizes the Attorney General to conduct investigations into violations of the Trust Act. And then we also have Chicago's Welcoming City Ordinance, which again prohibits city agencies and their employees, including police officers, from participating and cooperating in civil immigration enforcement. Go to the next one. We have the Illinois Human Rights Act. So for those who are interested in housing or about what are their rights as a tenant. So the Illinois Human Rights Act prohibits discrimination in housing, also employment, financial credit, and education. And then last but not least, another housing one. This prohibits a landlord from disclosing or threatening to disclose or attempting eviction based on a tenant's immigration status. So you may have heard about this piece of legislation in the news as well. Next slide.
Now we're going to talk about student protections. So let's start off with FERPA, Family Education Rights and Privacy. This is very important for families and parents specifically because this protects student educational records and family information. So FERPA supersedes the state law and is applicable to schools and post-secondary institutions. So once the students go to college, then the privacy transfers to the students. So it's very important to maintain good communication with your child, that way you're in the loop of their grades, of their records, but it does protect them from their personal and private educational records. Let's move on to the next protection. There's Plyer versus Doe. So a 1982 Supreme Court decision that affirms all children, regardless of immigration status, have a constitutional right to a free public education. This is very important because regardless of your immigration status, you students have access to an education. So this helped prior outlaws not only policies that directly bar immigrant students from enrolling in school, but also indirect attempts that discourage enrollment in public schools. So we'll talk a little bit more on the next slide, but let's move on to the next protection. And then there's the McKinney-Vento. So this is a federal law that also offers protections for children in temporary living situations. This is a great protection for those who are newcomers who might have not had an address or an opportunity to put their address to go to school. So this offers a protection. And Nina, I don't know if you'd like to add anything to any of these.
No, I just wanted to make a point that McKinney-Vento came up a lot when there were thousands of newcomers entering our Illinois schools. So thank you for mentioning that, Brian.
Yeah, no problem. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So as we were mentioning Plyer versus Doe, this is very important because there is a long-standing protection against immigration enforcement from K to through 12 public education settings. So this was a case that was brought by MALDEF. The Supreme Court made access to a free public education a constitutional right, regardless of immigration status. So these are just some very important facts to know when sending your children to school. Know that they shouldn't be limited on attending, that they should be urged to attend school. Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement cannot engage in activities that discourage them, and it would be a violation to the United States Constitution because it would deny the right to attend school regardless of their immigration status. So if you learn about an immigration enforcement activity happening at your school, please make sure to contact MALDEF through that email. Here's more contact information if there is a situation that occurs at a school. Thank you. So now we're going to move on to the family safety planning. This is very important to have in case of an emergency. Let's talk a little bit more about what that is. So it's a tool created in the event of a crisis or a family emergency. This tool is to ensure the safety, well-being, and continuity of care for undocumented family members in case of detention or in case of deportation or in case of other emergencies. So what are the options? There should be an end goal, whether it's reunification or if it's the continuity care in the United States. So we're gonna dive into these two, but starting off with reunification, that's intended use of information, including in your family safety plan, to support reunifying your children with the separated parents. So creating a plan with that goal is to make sure you have a family safety plan that talks about documentation needed for travel, a budget for emergency fund, and then also other documents that can help those families be reunited. And then there's the continuity of care in the United States. So it's intended use of that information, including in that safety plan to support the guardian, to support continuity of care in the United States without the plans of family reunification. So it's very important to be prepared in case of an emergency. So it's better to have a plan and an end goal in case something were to happen.
Yeah, and if I can just add something real quick here, Brian, thank you for that. And we know that, every family situation is different and unique, right? And so these are two potential goals, but we know that, some uh might be, each goal might be more possible than the other depending on your situation. So we really want to be sensitive to that. And at the same time, your situation might change, right? So I think it's important to keep, while you have a preferred end goal, to keep your explore both options and to just be as prepared as possible, right? And so Brian is going to go into that.
Yeah, thank you, Nina. Let's move on to the next slide. So, what are the elements of a family safety plan? So, there are a lot of details that go into family plans. So, it may be easier to think of organizing the different elements of a family plan by sections. The first one can be on family information. This is to create a detailed list of information for each member of the family. And then there's number two, the file of important documents. So this can include important documents of like identification, IDs, and information from your home country. Then there's the guardianship. So this helps ensure that you can create an exhaustive list of close and trusted individuals who are able and have agreed to take guardianship. And lastly, there's the health and medical information. So this will include medical history and physician information, addresses, and locations. Let's move on to the next slide. So as we mentioned, there is a lot on these lists, but it's very important to be detailed when creating a family safety plan. So when it comes to family information, these are examples of what you can have, whether it's your documents that contain your name, date of birth. So this could be like IDs, or these could be different documents that also include your phone number, where you go to school, where do you work, the addresses, and then for your children, what is the teacher's name, what is their classroom number, are they involved, are they in an after school program? So all of this is very important to have detailed in case of an emergency. And then what are those important documents as mentioned? Driver's licenses, state IDs, passports, marriage license if applicable. If they have DACA or green card, work permit, they might have a number. So it's very important to have these documents ready and available. And then if we can move on to the next slide. Then we talk about guardianship and health and medical information. So for the health and medical information, it's very important to include the history of the health of your family, including illnesses, conditions, medications, allergies, and then also to include medical insurance or coverage, what hospital would they go to, would you go to, and then what type of medication were you taking, or were you prescribed. So having all this information can be very helpful. And then lastly, guardianship. So this is the most sensitive part of the family planning, is it's identifying a trusted individual who can take care of your children in an event of an emergency where you are unable to do so. So it's very important to speak with an attorney around your family's guardianship planning and the required documents that should be in your plan. So make sure there's an example of the document that could be notarized power of attorney, and only go to an attorney or Department of Justice accredited representative if you have immigration questions. Notaries and notary publics are not attorneys and cannot give legal advice. So keep that in mind. And then if we could move on to the next slide. So in the event of reunification, we mentioned about the travel letter where both parents are authorized by guardian to travel with the minor child. So this should include the child information, the accompanying adult information, information where they're authorized to travel, the timeline, and specifics that the guardian or caregiver might have, and ensure that the letter is notarized as well. And then let's move on to the next slide. So the key takeaways, as mentioned, for this family safety plan is to determine the goal for the family safety plan, whether it's reunification or the continuity of care for your child, and then display your family safety plan in a visible location for your family. So that could be to keep a binder with all the materials, all the documents that you may need visible in an area that a family member may know where to catch, and the color of the binder might stand out as well. That could be very helpful and beneficial to locate it. And then keep your family and extended network up to date with your plan and any changes.
Just to quickly add, and that network can be, again, if you're comfortable sharing some of this information with your children's teachers or educators, things like that, that could be an example of your extended network as well.
So, as we navigate uncertain times, it's important to acknowledge the mental health impacts that these harsh anti-immigrant rhetorics can have. So, we'll discuss practical strategies for managing stress, supporting children's emotional well-being, and providing resources. So, when it comes to mental health, let's define it. Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, how we feel, and how we act. It also helps determines how we handle stress, relate to others, and make choices. And just wanted to throw some data. Anxiety and stress disorders are the most reported in the United States. So it's very important for us to understand, is our mental health being affected, and are our children demonstrating signs and symptoms of mental health disorders, and how can we identify it, and how can we seek support or find strategies to support ourselves and our children. Let's move on. Okay, so as mentioned earlier, and Nina mentioned it earlier, even earlier, when we talk about children and their development and their academic success, it can be affected negatively if they are limited through fear and anxiety. So we know when we feel anxious and we're scared, we're not able to think properly. And so we might isolate, we might be scared, and that might lead to not wanting to go to school, not wanting to pay attention. And so all these factors influence development and educational attainment and also social relationships as well. So let's move on to the next slide. So as mentioned, it is crucial. But if we maintain a good mental health and a good well-being, if we find healthy coping mechanisms and we build resilience, all these things can lead to a physical health benefits where we're sleeping well, we're eating well, we feel well, and that can lead us to do our activities normally, that can lead us, our children, to go to school and be able to learn comfortably. And then it can also build emotional resilience when we're taking well care of our well-being. It can lead to us establishing boundaries, establishing positive relationships, establishing resilience. All of these can lead to enhancing productivity and performance. But I will say, and we saw it earlier, when we don't take care of our well-being, it can lead to negative health benefits. It can lead us to struggle with resilience and not be able to overcome hardships. and it can affect our relationships, our communication with our families, with our teachers, with our parents, and that affects our learning and outcomes. So let's move on. And as mentioned, it's very important for a child's development, as they're growing, as they're learning. It can affect the way they self-regulate, the way they handle hardships, obstacles. Are they building resilience, or are they building more fear and anxiety, leading to potential disorders? And then are they developing emotional awareness of others, creating empathy, creating understanding of others and different cultures and identities? And then there's also that social interaction piece. Where are they able to socialize and interact with others? Are they able to understand their feelings? Are they able to control their emotions? And as mentioned, interact with others. So all of these, a good mental health and well-being can lead to strong social development, including relationships, interactions, and empathy and awareness. So how can we recognize stress that's impacting our mental health and our children? There can be physical symptoms where we might feel fatigue, headaches, or there might be issues with our sleep cycles, or even stomach problems, right? We might get tummy aches. And then there's the emotional symptoms where we might get irritated easily, or we might feel sad often, or hopeless. And that can lead to emotional numbness as well. So detecting that, witnessing that, seeing a change in our behavior and noticing these things can be a great way to recognize, like, hey, like maybe I'm not doing so well. Or our children, if if they're starting to show these physical symptoms, emotional symptoms, behavioral ones too, these are the ones that we can notice without them having to communicate, because they're withdrawing from their day-to-day activities. They're having difficulty concentrating. They're not doing well in school. They're not showing up to school. There's a change in their appetites. So all of these can be symptoms for children and as well as adults. And for children specifically, another thing to look out for is that, are they acting out? Are they regressing in behavior? Are they having difficulty focusing at school? Are they isolating? All these things can be symptoms for us to pay attention to. So what are some practical ways to manage stress and protect our mental health? Some coping strategies for parents and families that I love to talk about and are free are to prioritize rest and to prioritize sleep. Also, to eat well. What we eat can really affect our mood. So it's important to make sure we're eating fruit, we're drinking water, we're eating things that can give us energy as well. And then also set some time aside to for activities that can relax us or recharge us. I know Nina mentioned that she likes to work on art and draw and allow that to calm her down. And for me, it's going for a walk or going to the gym, doing activities that can help relax us and, distract our minds from maybe the negative. And then taking care of your mind and spirit. So when negative thoughts raise cortisol levels, which can make you feel anxious and depressed. So having positive thoughts release dopamine and serotonin, which help you feel better. And so I always recommend watching like a comedy movie or with the family, watching something funny to really take away those anxious feelings and bring about laughter and joy. And then number five is building a support system. It's very important to have a trusted family member, friends, or community groups that you can trust and receive support from. So it's very important to stay connected and stay socialized, because if we're isolating and we're not receiving support, it can make things worse sometimes. So it's very important to stay engaged, stay active, and then create a safe space for yourself and for your children, and encourage each other to express emotions, feelings, and reassure them that they are loved. A lot of times, we feel like demonstrating emotions can be something that in our community is not acceptable, but there's so much data that shows that repressing emotions can negatively affect our well-being. So it's been very important to create a safe space, an open space where there can be communication and trust and vulnerability for our children and for ourselves. And then number seven is to focus on a routine as much as possible. Make sure that us and our children have our routine so we can stay on track, whether it's waking up, brushing our teeth, making breakfast, taking the train, taking the car, whatever it is, like having a set routine to keep us focused, keep us on track of doing the things that we need to do, because sometimes we might feel overwhelmed and not want to do the things that we need to do, and that can lead us to isolating and not being productive. And then lastly, my favorite breathing exercises to calm our nervous system and to also focus on what we can control. So it's very important. A strategy that I like to tell families is to practice the deep breathing technique, which is inhaling for 4 seconds, holding it for 4 seconds, and then exhaling for 4 seconds. So let's move on to the next slide. And so, with all of these strategies mentioned and how important mental health is, I want us to think about what are some activities that we do at home or that we want to consider doing at home to support the well being of our children and our families and ourselves. Because a lot of times we might think that, oh, I'm just gonna not talk about it, I'm not gonna think about it. But that again could be repression and it can affect us negatively. So I challenge you all to really take the time and find something new to try, whether it's going for a walk, whether it's listening to music and dancing, going and learning a new hobby. I'm trying to learn salsa, like doing things that can really bring us joy and peace is something I'd recommend. Let's move on to the next slide. Another thing, again, with well-being, it's not just how we think and it's not just how we feel, it's also how we act. And so when we feel bad, when we don't feel good, we end up reacting in a negative way. But if we feel good and we're happy, we end up reacting in a positive way. So these reactions can affect our relationships with our family and our children and our colleagues, those we work with, either helping those relationships or hurting them. So a quick scenario that I wanted to demonstrate of anger is a parent is frustrated because their child isn't listening and is refusing to do their homework. What is the reaction in an unhealthy scenario? The parent raises their voice, yells, and says, "Why can't you just do what I ask? You're never going to go anywhere in life if you keep acting like this." So what's that impact? The child feels scared, ashamed, and may internalize the criticism. The parent's outburst creates fear and tension, damaging the parent-child relationship and affecting the child's self-esteem. So this can affect so many things: the child's self-esteem, the child and parent's relationship, their communication, just because we wanted to react. But it's okay to feel anger, but let's see how we can react in a healthy manner. So same scenario, the child is not listening and refusing to do their homework, but the parent reacts differently. The parent takes a deep breath, says firmly, "I'm really frustrated right now because I need your help to get your homework done. Let's take a 5-minute break and then we can sit down and figure this out together." What is that impact? The child feels safe, understands that the anger is not about the situation or about their character or about who they are. It's about the situation. And the parent models healthy communication. The child learns problem solving skills and that it's okay to express frustration without being harmful. So just a quick scenario, like example and scenario of emotions. All of them are necessary, but it's how we react that matters. Let's move on to the next slide. And then quickly as well, the power of separation. We want to separate what we can and what we cannot control. Sometimes we can become overwhelmed, like we mentioned in the icebreaker, of all the water that's getting in our boat. And typically that could be things that are out of our control. But what we can control, and in that boat scenario, the water that we can get out are how we respond, the boundaries we set of what water is coming in, what we let in, right? And then another thing we can control is our effort, our actions, our purpose, who we engage with, and our perspective. So it's very important to think about that boat scenario, think about how our perspective can really change situations, and especially separating what we can control and what we can't control. So let's move on to the next slide. So Nina, I don't know if you want, I've been talking a lot. I don't know if you want to take it from here.
Thank you, Brian. That was really great information. I think one big takeaway I had from all of that is, at the beginning we talked a lot about how fear and anxiety and how that can have long-term negative effects, which is certainly true and very real. But at the same time, if we learn how we can and manage and cope with a lot of that stress and anxiety and support one another, it could also build resilience, right? Which is certainly something that all of us have within us. And so just really want to reiterate that as well. And I think you did that perfectly. So thank you for that, Brian. So just some key messages and takeaways for, for families out there that you are not alone. Again, many families are experiencing similar stress and challenges. But at the same time, we know that there are many unique challenges that families are going through. So we just really want to acknowledge that, but you are not alone in this. Next, plan and share. So we really emphasize creating a safety plan, outlining critical family information in the event of an emergency. Um, whatever that emergency may be. Sharing your plan with your trusted network, right? Whether that's other family members, trusted coworkers, your children's teachers, and the like. Seek support, whether through professional help or community resources. So making sure you know which community resources are out there. And in the next slide, we'll actually help you with that. But also recognizing that a lot of the challenges that we go through may require professional help, right? So knowing when to seek that next step is important. Also, as I mentioned, knowledge is power. So stay empowered, take control of your mental health, your well-being. This can also foster resilience and strength during these difficult times. And then finally, stay informed, not overwhelmed, which is easier said than done, right? But it's important to access reliable information about immigration policies, right? Limit exposure to news that increases anxiety. We'll go to the next slide. So I mentioned community resources. So the forum compiled a number of resources for immigrant families, providers, advocates, pretty much anyone out there who wants to seek resources. This is a compilation of resources in the fields of immigration, legal, food, housing, and then well-being and self-care strategies that Brian mentioned in this presentation. So you all can access this on our website, either through the QR code or the link below in the presentation. We also have this on our website, and we will have a Spanish version of this guide on our website shortly as well. So really want to thank you all for joining this presentation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.